Hey, hi. In this video, we will see how to build GitHub automations with using native REST APIs of GitHub. So here I will try to mimic a solution which is basically an automation solution which will do a required automations on the GitHub. Especially we will look on the GitHub Actions, right? So there are like a n number of solutions which demands an automation that needs to be achieved on the GitHub objects. It could be GitHub Actions, GitHub Access Management, repository management, and the compliance management on the repository, right? So there are huge set of scenarios where automation is demanded. In such cases, this is an example solution which can help you to how to use GitHub provided REST API and construct an automation solution from the serverless solutions like AWS Lambda, or it could be function app in Azure. So likewise, let's get started and see how we can build this kind of automations with using the REST APIs here. Now I'm in Google search. Let me put a word called GitHub Action APIs, right? And then you see that there is a nice document from GitHub provided. Let's click on that, and if you open the sidebar here, so there are lot many useful documents here. So currently the API version that is running is 22.11.28, right? So in that one, the first tab is actually helps you to how to quickly start using this REST API and the documents around this conception of this REST API. And then if you slide it down, so there is a huge list of titles here, or huge list of drop down boxes here, basically, right? So these are nothing but these are all, let me call it as an objects of GitHub. It includes GitHub Actions, activities, apps, billing, branches, checkout, right? So these are all a set of objects, or basically set of components of the GitHub, right? So these are all the components where actually you might need to have a solution to build an automation which can easyfies the the management of your repository at your at your company or at your enterprise, right? So among this list, I consider one of the major the component or major object of the GitHub, that is GitHub Action, is where it actually demands the automations, right? So in this video we will try to try to explore how to use the GitHub Action APIs, try to use it in the Postman, and then we construct the automations with using the Python script, and then we'll try to deploy an example automation workflow that is actually AWS Lambda, and then we try to see that the automation is working as expected. So here, if you open the actions, which is nothing but GitHub Actions, so it has again further, it has a further components down. It has artifacts, cache, OIDC, permissions, secrets, right? So there are a lot many things here, right? So basically, these are all the components of GitHub Actions, and you might need to build an automations to deal with this, right? So here, as an example show, again down the line, if this video becomes hit, I'm going to create a further automations on the other components of the GitHub as well, right? But for now, we are focusing on one instance of GitHub Action, which is basically GitHub Action is a component of the GitHub. In that one, we are looking at one actions, right? Let's go for the workflow actions, right? So workflow runs. So if you see here, so once you click on that link, and if you follow this particular path, REST API, what is a component action? Workflow runs. Okay, so workflow run is one component underneath the actions. So here, if you drag down and try to read it basically, so here you can actually see the headings. So there is a scenario where you need to rerun a job from the workflow run. So this is the API which actually helps you to do that, right? And then if you slide it down, you will get a one more instance of API, that is list the workflow run for a repository, right? Now let me try to explain you what is the construct of this particular API actually, right? So here in the right hand side, so there is an example explaining how to use the REST API, and they have given three options, that is using the curl, using the JavaScript, or using the GitHub CLI. But here we will use Python to build the automation here, not these components, all right? But actually we are using the parts which is given as an example here. So so the list workflow runs for a repository, it's a get operation, and the HTTP URL for that will be constructed with using this. It is it has the resource like repos, and then you need to provide the owner of the repos, repo name, actions, and the runs. So basically, so this is the path where you get the required resource of the API. And just to try to come down, and you see that curl-l, and this is the where you construct the headers. The header will be constructed with using accept, authorization, and API version. The key values and the respective values are already been provided. Some part is actually you need to fill it. So for authorization, it is actually uses the tokens, right? So till now, APIs are being used with using the GitHub Action token. So Git are basically generally called as a PAT token. So here I will use PAT token, that is personal access token, and we use that token here, and then we will authorize the API, and then API should be working. And then this is the URL of this particular API, that is list workflow runs for a repository, right? And if you see here, so the base server, so remember that, let me call this component as a base server. It includes https://api.github.com. So api.github.com is basically the foundational FQDN of the URL of the API URL, and then you're gonna suffix it with using this string, right? And in total, this is becomes the API URL, right? So likewise, what I do is so we're gonna, now you got the glimpse of this one, right? And now try to read out something that is being nicely written in the left hand side. So it explains that list all workflows run for a repository. You can use the parameter to narrow down the list of the results. For more information, using the parameters, right? So here in this document, it will tell you like what are all the the parameter it will accept in the header, then the path of the parameter. If you see here, there is a path, in the sense this is the path of the URL, or basically path of the basically this is the path of the API URL, right? So not only this one, so this API is also supports a query parameters. You can append the query parameter and try to narrow down the return of the API or response of the API. That includes actors, branch, event, status, page per created. We will see how to use it in a good example here. So likewise, I'm gonna so down the line, if you see, right, that it will also tells you how does that response looks like. So this is how the response looks like, yeah. And then the status code. So if the API has accepted the request, so it will return the HTTP 200, which is generic information that you need to know. Right now, we got this information. Let's try to run this from the the Postman here. So I have opened the Postman. If you see here, right, now what I do is so let me try to construct the URL for in front of you, right? So if I copy this and try to put it in the so basically here, yeah, so let me put it here, something like this. And then so here we need to give the owner and the repo name. So let me take my good example of my repository. So this is my repository where we try to do a demo here. So my repository name is this one. So this is the owner, and this is the your repo name. So this is my owner name. Let me copy this owner name actually here. So this is my owner name, and then the repo name is this one. This is the repo name basically. And then so here's the repo name, right? So GitHub Actions run. So now what I do is if I go to the headers, okay, let's go to the headers and try to construct the headers here. So here I have constructed the header with using these options. So as I said that it has accept, it has authorization, it has the GitHub Action API versions. So all those I have kept it here. Remember that this is my PAT token. I'm going to disable this PAT token after the demo. So you don't need to try to copy and use it from your side. All right, so with this, it is basically prefixed with the bearer token, right? In total, this is how you need to set up the the GitHub Actions APIs in the Postman. And let's try to send it. Actually, let's see what does that it returns. It returns that actually list of workflow runs, right? So currently it has a one workflow run. Let me go back to the GitHub Actions and you try to see the workflows here. Here you go, all workflows. In that one I have only one workflow run, and that is being listed here, right? And if you drag down, so it is giving hell lot of information which is usable for further automations as well, right? So this is how you're gonna invoke the APIs from the Postman. But Postman is just for testing purpose, but for automation you need to build using the code. So here I have constructed the Python script which we will run from the AWS Lambda and try to build the scenarios here. So again, so when you have tested your APIs from the Postman, you can always easily convert that into a code by clicking on this code button, and you see that Python request. So Postman is automatically converting this API invocation in the form of a script which can be reused for automations. Remember that it is just mimicking the, so it is basically giving a snippet of code which you need to reuse or reconstruct so that it becomes efficient for automations. Right now, as part of this demo, I have already pre-thought it and the script is already ready. I'm gonna quickly walk you through at a high level. We use the same script in the AWS Lambda and try to invoke the scenarios. Right. So here, first scenario is we have seen to list all the workflows, and in this one, I have an extra function written or extra API written that is actually invokes the GitHub Actions basically, right? Now let me show you here. So this is a Python script as you see here. So these are all the the imports I'm doing, which you also need to do this. You don't need to worry because I'm going to share this code in my video's description. In this video's description, you can find a GitHub repository link, and that GitHub repository link will take you to the script. Use this script according to your changes. All right. So remember that you need to change the the parameters that we use according to your convention or according to your repository. So here this is a class. In this class we have an init function. So in that init function, so I'm using the secret. Remember that. So in this Postman, I have bluntly shown you my pat token, but that is not a best practice. In the automations, you need to use it in a secret manager. So that's the reason I have written a script which can retrieve the secret or basically your pat token from the secret manager. So that's the reason I'm using a Boto3 client to read or interact with the secret manager like this, right? And then we are hard coding the variable value, that is GitHub owner and the repository name, right? Then we have a function called invoke GitHub Actions. As its name says, you have a workflow been created in your repository like this. Say for example, if I go to the repository and go to the go to the workflow folder. So in that one we have a 3 workflow files, or basically 3 GitHub Actions. So in this one we are interested to invoke this particular workflow with using an automation in the sense. So you can always invoke it from the from this particular the GitHub repository by clicking on manually. But of course, so if there is a scenario in your enterprise where you need to invoke this GitHub Actions with using automations, definitely this is how you need to do it, right? So here it has the repository dispatch, and this is the basically we are giving a type of the event called workflows, and this is a simple job which actually receives the parameter from the invocation and tries to run certain shell commands. That's all. Okay, now let me go back to the code here and we will start to explore the function. So I have written a function called invoke GitHub Action. So what it does is it actually retrieves the pat token, dynamically construct the API URL, dynamically construct the headers like this, and then creates an example parameter called Sunday and 22, and then so it actually prints that a custom event. Then we construct the data that is needed for invocation of. So remember that this is a post method, that is invoke a GitHub action is basically a post method. So we are invoking the post method with using the URL that we constructed above. We are using the data, we are using the header, right? And then I'm just trying to get the response and orchestrate here, which is basically best practice to do that, right? So likewise, just now we have seen list all the runs belongs to a particular workflow, right? So we have constructed that workflow. You can use this one, that is list all the runs belongs to a particular workflow. The here, if you see here, so we are checking all the workflows that is belongs to a repository, but you would also need to narrow down that in the sense, get me all those runs belongs to a particular workflow. A repository can have multiple workflows, but you are interested to get workflows belongs to a particular belongs to a particular workflow file, or basically particular a workflow file. Runs belongs to a particular workflow file like that. Yeah. So what do I mean is if I go back to this one, to the to the repository. So right now, so whatever you see all workflow, so that is the workflow belongs to the repository in general. But if you want to narrow down that a workflow belongs to a particular actions, right? So this is basically, it belongs to a called workflow.yaml file, right? So likewise, so this is the, so basically we are this is actually enabling to understand both the way. So here we have constructed the resource something like this, that is GitHub Actions, workflows, specific workflows and runs, right? And then constructed the same headers, all these, and so I'm just doing the coding tricks, getting all the runs, possible runs, okay? And we are using the certain query parameters as well. If you see here, I'm constructing the URL which using the query parameters. The query parameter supported here is like created time, number of pages that it can return, then the page per the number of returns per page basically, yeah. So that is that is, these are all nothing but query parameters, so that you narrow down it, okay. And then we are returning the all the runs belong to a particular workflow file, right? And then you have the get a secret. So this is a simple script which will retrieve the secret from the secret manager, right? And then we have a orchestration here. Now before I go to the Lambda, let me run it from the local. So here we want to get all the runs belongs to this. So if I run this script from this particular Visual Studio Code, so here you go, right? So I'm getting a certain input as well, right? So not only that, let's try to invoke the GitHub Actions as well. So let me invoke a GitHub Actions here. So by using something like this, so let me try to call these functions from here, and this function does not has any kind of parameter, so I'm just bluntly calling that functions, right? And then let me invoke this particular function. When I call these functions, what happens is it is invoking a GitHub Actions. So if I go to the GitHub Actions and try to refresh it, we should see one more run running here. Remember, right? So now you see that there's a magic happen, in the sense the automation has invoked it. Now while it is running, let me try to take you to my AWS account. So this is my AWS account. I have created a Lambda called GitHub Action Automations, and this Lambda has a Lambda layer that is called request Lambda layer, right? And then the code. So I'm going to share this code in the video description anyways. So this is the same code that we are running, executing from this particular Lambda, right? Let me show you the scenarios here. Basically, I wanted to make you get confident that it gets run from the Lambda as well. So not only from my laptop. Now here what we are doing is we are listing all the runs that is happening on this one, right? But here remember that we are returning the length. So here, so if I go to the GitHub Actions, it should give me the 2 workflow runs. Now let's try to invoke this Lambda. I'm invoking this Lambda with a test, the test parameters, and it is returned the 2 output, which means that it is doing the job. Let's try to call the invoke the GitHub Action something like this, right? So let me call that particular function here, and since this function does not has any automations, I'm removing that. So basically whatever the code I have shown you, this is the same code that I'm using, nothing changed, so don't get confused. But I'm showing that invocation from the Lambda. That is the aim of this video as well, right? So I'm deploying this change into this Lambda, and then I'm gonna, once the deployment gets success, let me do a test. Doing a test is nothing but I'm just invoking that Lambda with a dummy dummy event. Here you go, it looks like it has invoked. If I go to the GitHub Actions and try to refresh it, we should see the GitHub Actions, right? So it is invoked. Now if I go to the previously run GitHub Actions, you see that it is clearly running as expected, right? And then you can always check the output as well, actually, right? So here it has the parameters, right? So it has a parameter like 22, parameter 20, something like that. Basically the aim was to invoke the GitHub Actions, list the GitHub Actions, it is working. All right, so with that note, I have shown you how to build an automations around GitHub with using REST APIs. Finally, I can request please do subscribe my channel. That would really encourage me a lot. With that note, thank you, thanks a lot, and see you in the next video.